I think we're good. We are.
All right, sorry, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to this Metro Plan Orlando CAC meeting. I hope you've enjoyed your month off, your summer break. But I'm Jeffrey Campbell. I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This meeting is fully in person, so we've asked all members to be present here in the boardroom. We will still have virtual public participation. I'll ask all committee members to please speak clearly and use your microphones so that those joining us virtually will be able to hear you. At this time, I've asked our Vice Chairman, Dr. Dan Stevens, to please do our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. There are two public comment points in the meeting. Members of the public who are here and wish to talk, we'll ask you to submit your speaker cards to Ms. Lisa Smith. Those attending on Zoom and want to speak can use the raise hand feature. We also accepted comments by email before the meeting. At the July Metro Plan Orlando Board meeting, I informed the board of some of the desires relating to Transportation Improvement Program and the prioritized project list, such as the need to encourage more clean energy infrastructure and to support robust transit operations. The board approved both the TIP and the PPL. I also shared the committee's suggestions for the FDOT truck parking, such as public-private partnerships and technical solutions. And I let them know of our support for the work of the FDOT Safety Office. And I also reconfirmed to Ms. Laureen Bobo that we appreciate the work that they're doing. I'd like to add, again, our meeting is going to be very full today. We have 4 presentations scheduled, and I will ask that you please keep your questions and comments to a minute or two. At this time, I'd like to ask Ms. Marianne Horn to give us our agenda review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members and everybody attending with us today, both in the room and online. In this format, as you know, we need a quorum. That is now 14 members in the room to conduct votes. As always, it is important to RSVP for meetings, and we thank you for doing that. There is still, of course, a Zoom and YouTube option for the public, and we encourage the public to do that when it's convenient. I have several announcements today. First off, we received sad news, very sad news recently from one of our partner agencies, and many of you may have heard this. Mr. Jim Harrison, the CEO of Lynx, died suddenly. His funeral is coming up this weekend. Our condolences to the family and colleagues. We worked with Jim in many roles when he was at Orange County and later at Lynx. We always appreciated Jim. His professionalism, his commitment to the community was unparalleled. He will be missed. I would like to report on some staffing changes that we have and that have taken place here at Metro Plan Orlando since our last meeting. First of all, Ms. Taylor Laurent, whom many of you know, was promoted to the position of Manager of Transportation Planning. So congratulations are in order. Taylor is with us. There she is. You will be seeing more of Taylor in the future. Also, we have welcomed 2 transportation planners, Jason Sartorio, who, Jason is with us. Jason comes to us from the private sector. Our second recent addition, Slade Downs, also with us today. Slade. He comes to us from the Sarasota Manatee MPO. So he has already trod some of the ground over here. We're looking forward to working with both these men, and you will be no doubt seeing them in presentations later on. This past month, I am sorry to report that we received 2 resignations from this committee. Kyle Longville contacted us to say that he needed to step off of the committee because of some increased work and home responsibilities that have made it just impossible for him to keep up his membership on the CAC. So we are working with Seminole County to get a replacement for him. Also, Naki McMullen contacted us to say that he was resigning because he's moving out of the area. And we will be recruiting, he was a Metro Plan Orlando appointee, so we will be recruiting for his replacement a little bit later in the year when we do our annual recruitment to fill those positions, which brings me to the fact that if you know someone that you think would make a good CAC member, please encourage them to apply at that time. Our October 26th meeting, I want to forecast a little for you here. On October 26th, when we get together, we're going to feature something a little bit out of the ordinary because we're going to have a workshop focused on our active transportation plan. And this will be led by Ms. Taylor Laurent. This will allow us to take a deeper dive into what our staff sees ahead for bicycle and pedestrian transportation, and I know many of you have some opinions on that, and you can learn some more about that, and we should have a really good discussion. So please plan to attend that day and come prepared for another packed meeting. Also at the October meeting, we will begin the process of choosing officers for the 2023 calendar year because we'll be asking for volunteers to serve on the officer selection committee. That committee will meet virtually in November to come up with nominees to be voted on at our final meeting of the year, which will be December the 7th. So if you are interested in committee leadership in the future, if you want to serve on the committee that nominates future leadership, you can give that some thought. And we do stipulate that those who are on the selection committee also cannot put their own names forward for leadership positions. I think you see why that would be not a good idea. As for today's agenda, I want to point out a typo in the title of one of our action items on the agenda that you received, action item 7B, dealing with the emergency amendment to the TIP. The title should reference fiscal year 2022-23 and 26-27 TIP, the same year that's referenced in the item itself. Everything else pertaining to that agenda item is correct, and Mr. Keith Caskey will give you a little more background on that before you are asked to ratify it, and I apologize for that error. Now I would like to ask Ms. Lisa Smith to please call our roll.
Good morning. I'll ask all committee members to keep your microphones off until your name is called and go on mute again once your name is called. Beltran,
Here.
Bobinger,
Here.
Bosley, Buttery,
Here.
Campbell,
Present.
Coleman,
Here.
Cologne. Okay. Cortez,
Present.
Council, Davis,
Here.
Henry, here. Lassard, Liza Swan, Lopez,
Here.
Mormon, Mott,
Present.
Mueller,
Present.
O'Hanlon, Peters,
Here.
Pigram,
Present.
Pizzo,
Present.
Rump,
Yes, here.
Savidra, Salas,
Here.
Sabila,
Present.
Stevens,
Here.
Torrealba, Webster, White. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the roll call, and we do have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Smith. We will now hear public comments on action items Do we have anyone online who'd like to speak to any of the action items? If so, please use the raise hand function on your screen or press *9 on your keypad. When your name is called, the host will unmute your microphone. You will see a button pop up that says the host wants to unmute you. Accept the prompt to activate your microphone. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record, and please hold your comments to 2 minutes. Are there anyone, or do you have any comments?
There are no hands raised on the attendee side, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have anyone present in the boardroom today who wish to comment on action items?
I have not received any requests.
Are there any written comments that were submitted before the meeting?
Mr. Chair, we did not receive any written comments before this meeting.
Okay, well, we'll move on to our action items. We have 4 action items today. We'll ask for a motion and a second, then open the floor for discussion. Members making a motion or a second, please state your name and address for the record. Our first action item is the approval of the CAC minutes from June 22nd, 2022, and they are found in tab 2 in your agenda packets. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve. Dan Stevens.
RJ second.
Okay, have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. This is a voice vote, so if you please, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposes? Hearing none, the motion carries. Our next items is a request for the ratify of emergency amendment to Transportation Improvement Program, which is in tab 2 in your agenda packets, along with some supporting information. Mr. Keith Caskey will present the information. Mr. Caskey, you have our attention.
Okay, well, good morning. We have 3 TIP amendment requests this morning. The first request came up after the June, July committee and board meetings, and this had to be amended into the state TIP by an August 10th deadline, just to keep the project on schedule. So FDOT requested this amendment be processed on an emergency basis. So our board chairwoman signed the resolution on August 10th based on MetroPlan's policy for emergency TIP amendments. And this request includes adding funds for the resurfacing and safety project on State Road 436 from North Lake Boulevard to Boston Avenue due to cost increases for the project. And the information on this is in tab 2 in your agenda packets, and the board will be requested to ratify this amendment at their meeting on September 14th. So unless there's any questions, we're asking for you to recommend your recommendation to ratify the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Caskey. Okay, I will entertain a motion.
Move approval.
We have a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? Seeing or hearing none, we're ready for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposes? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Caskey. Our next item is a request to recommend approval for an amendment to the TIP to include projects that had funds that rolled forward from the previous fiscal year. This proposed amendment is in tab 3 in your agenda package. Mr. Caskey will present this one as well. Mr. Caskey?
Okay, well, this is our annual roll forward amendment, and this includes projects that had funds that were originally programmed in fiscal year 2022 in last year's TIP. And those funds were not committed by the end of the fiscal year on June 30th, and so they just automatically roll forward into fiscal year 2023 and FDOT's new adopted 5-year work program that came out in July. So we have to amend our TIP to include these projects just so it'll be consistent with the work program, and this does not affect the cost or schedule for these projects. And as many of you know, this is a routine procedure that we go through about this time every year. And as the chairman said, the information on this is in tab 3. So again, unless there's any questions, we're asking for your approval of the amendment.
Okay, consistency is good. Thank you,
I
Mr.
second
Hanlon.
that approval. Judy
Okay.
Pizzo.
Motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? Seeing or hearing none again, we're ready for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposes? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Caskey.
Well, our third amendment request includes some scoping and funding changes for several projects on I-4 that are preliminary to the Beyond the Ultimate project, and that information's in tab 4. Before you take action on this, FDOT staff is going to give a brief presentation to provide some more details on these projects. So I'm going to turn it over to Catalina Chacon from FDOT for the presentation, and she's going to be presenting virtually.
Thank you, Ms. Cassidy.
Good morning. Can you hear me well? Just want to make sure. Okay. So again, I'm Catalina Chacon with FDOT, and today with me, hopefully by the podium, is our FDOT PM for the I-4 Beyond the Ultimate project, Hada Magib. The two of us are going to be presenting to you on the I-4 Beyond the Ultimate. So we want to provide an update today, and as Keith mentioned, you're going to be seeing a tip-step amendment for some of those projects that received stimulus funding to be able to advance to construction for the I-4 Beyond the Ultimate. However, before we proceed with the presentation, we are aware that you might have a lot of questions about how what we are currently doing fits with the bigger picture of I-4. This is not the first time that we come here and present and provide an update. So as you all know, this is a massive project that it's evolving and changing rapidly. We are looking at potential options to advance to construction as the funds that are available to us through revenues are not enough to move the entire program to construction. So as I mentioned, there has been a lot of back and forth. We have presented in the past, we have tweaked scopes, we have updated estimates, and we're trying to articulate these changes as often as quickly as we can. So with that in mind, we want to reassure you and let you know that we are doing our best to be as transparent as we can and answer as many questions as we have the answers to. So this is a critical corridor for our growing region, and it remains a top priority for you as well as us, DOT. So as we might not have all the questions to you today, we are actively working to iron out the little details to ensure that we are planning appropriately the I-4 corridor to meet growing needs and traffic demands of the region well into the future. So as I mentioned, we're here today to present a piece of the I-4 Beyond the Ultimate that received stimulus funding for construction. And we feel very confident that by the end of this year, we will be back to you with a presentation that highlights the work that we have been doing and what the next steps could look like for the bigger picture of I-4 Beyond the Ultimate. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Adam so that we can proceed with this presentation. Adam?
Okay, yep. Thank you, Catalina, for this introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us today to provide this presentation. My name is Hatem Agib of the Department of Transportation Project Management Office. Before getting into the projects that are part of this TIP amendment, I think you'll see 4 project numbers. I would like to give just an overview of the I-4 corridor. So if you look at the screen to the left, the exhibit to the left, in the middle, in the gray color, that's I-4 Ultimate, recently construction complete and with the express lanes open to traffic. North of that, we call that the I-4 Beyond the Ultimate North. South of that is I-4 Beyond the Ultimate South. The north comprises of 2 segments, segments 3 and 4, Seminole County and Volusia County. In the south, you have 4 segments, segments 2, 1A, 1B, and 5. The biggest challenge with those segments really is the funding. Each piece, costs about hundreds of millions of dollars each. Some segments in the south cost over $1 billion each. So while we continue to look for opportunities for funding, the demand and the needs on I-4 changes on a daily basis, and we continue to look for phased approach to meet the changing demand, the operational needs along I-4 with the available funding. So with that in mind, we always look for improvements that we can provide in the short term, for the I-4 commuters. Again, I-4 is a strategic corridor. It's important for the region and for everyone that drives on it. For the purpose of today's meeting, we're focusing on I-4 beyond the ultimate south. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom into the south segment. The projects you see on the screen, we have 4 projects that are the near-term improvements that we have lined up. Not all of these are in the TIP amendment. Again, we're just trying to show you what we have before we get into the specific of the project numbers that are part of the TIP amendment. I'll start with the one on the top, the 44315-1, that's I-4 at Sand Lake Road interchange. We're doing interchange improvements in Sand Lake Road. The project is in active procurement as we speak. We expect that we have the bid opening sometime end of October of this year. After that, the second project is the State Road 528, the 448915-1. That's the 528 Ramp Widening. If you're traveling down I-4 from the downtown direction and you're taking the 528 ramp towards I-Drive or the airport direction, in the existing condition, that ramp is a single lane. Based on the traffic projections, we're seeing spillbacks from that lane onto the I-4 main line. As a result, we have this project to go ahead and have that lane widened to 2 lanes. So that project is actually in design as we speak. We're looking to go to construction sometime summer of next year. A third project below that is 44113-3. That's the I-4 at Darrell Carter interchange. It's a new interchange. The project just got awarded a couple of weeks ago. We expect that to go to construction in a month or 2. It depends on the schedule, so that's coming up pretty soon. Last project on the bottom is the 448914-1. That's the I-4 at 535 interchange improvement project. At that one, we're about to start the procurement process. We're looking at advertising end of this month as a design build contract. So those are the 4 projects that are lined up as near-term improvements. To the left of the I-4, you see the westbound express lane. So that is a single lane express lane in the westbound direction that's going to be built under multiple projects. So if I hit next, you'll see the small dashed bubbles really is that single lane express lane in the westbound direction built onto 3 different projects. It's the same section, but it's just built into 3 different projects just because of the limits. So the first one, the 44315-3 will be built part of the Sand Lake Road interchange project. Second piece of the tube is being built under the Darrell Carter Parkway interchange project, and then the final piece of that single lane express lane is being built part of the I-4 at 535 interchange project. One thing I would like to note is since based on current schedules, we anticipate that the I-4 at Sand Lake Road interchange project to finish the last. As a result, that project will go ahead and put the friction cores, striping, and final tubular markers for the entire length of that express lane, just because of the timing and the schedules of those projects. So that's kind of a quick overview of what we have lined up. As far as the TIP amendment, those 4 project numbers is what you're seeing. Part of that amendment, the first 2 on top. So the 2 on top are goes with, which means it's a single contract, single construction contract. And the 2 blue on the bottom are goes with as well, so it's a single contract as well. So basically our 2 projects, 4 project numbers. For the purpose of today, we will start with the south, moving up. So with that, we'll turn it over back to Catalina for these 2 projects. Catalina?
Thank you, Adam. So I'm going to be talking about the 448914-1, which is the I-4 at 535 interchange improvement project. Goes with 449771-1, which is the last portion of that single westbound express lane that we've also called the tube in the past. And that extends from west of Stereo 536 to west of Darrell Carter. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial of the existing configuration of the I-4 at 535 interchange. And as you can see, some of the key intersections that are close to the interchange include Hotel Plaza Boulevard, Vineland Avenue, and Palm Parkway to the north. So as we have been preparing our roadway plans and RFP package for this project, we're also validating traffic data and ensuring that this project is going to serve the traffic demand well into the future. We want to get the best bang for a buck for this project. And we are observing that the I-4 westbound off-ramp is under capacity. So vehicles are going to start to spill back onto main line of I-4, which is a safety concern. Additionally, if you click next, there's an animation that I want to pop right now. There we go. So additionally, one of the concepts that we were moving forward with, the original concept that you can see here on the screen, included a displaced left turn to handle the 535 northbound to I-4 westbound traffic. And this movement will also not work for the traffic demand in the area. We needed more capacity for that movement. So with these key movements, our updated concept is an enhancement of the original PD&E concept and will provide the most return on our investment and service life for this interchange. Next slide. So here's what we are proposing to be for our updated improvement or updated concept for the interchange. As you can see, there are two key ramp movements are better accommodated by one, the I-4 westbound off-ramp is being realigned to provide additional storage to this movement. So by realigning it and widening, we're providing the additional storage to avoid spillback onto mainland of I-4. And two, as you can see, there is a loop ramp or a blue line that is over the Crossroads property. That is a proposed loop ramp that is going to now serve the 535 northbound to I-4 westbound ramp movement. And by providing this loop movement, we are greatly increasing the capacity and storage for this ramp. Additionally, we're also going to do widening along northbound 535 to provide additional storage for the left and right turns onto Palm Parkway. And as you can see on the bottom part of the graphic, we are still providing an echelon intersection at Vineland Avenue and 535, as well as a reconfigured southbound stereo 535 loop ramp that accommodates the echelon intersection. As I mentioned earlier, this project received stimulus funding, and it is through this stimulus funding that we are being able to advance the project to construction. And in order to move to construction within the available funding, we are proposing to phase the construction of this interchange into phase 1 and phase 2. If you can click, please. There we go. Next slide. I'm gonna go over what the phasing will look like. So phase 1 is what you see on the top of the picture. And what we are proposing is to address the two critical ramp movements that I was discussing in my previous slide. So we're going to be realigning the I-4 westbound off-ramp and providing additional storage, as well as the new loop ramp from northbound 535 to I-4 westbound. We will also include widening along 535 for the left and turn lanes to Palm Parkway. And finally, we are also proposing to advance utility relocation of an existing FGT or Florida gas transmission line that will also be part of this project and is highlighted with green on this picture. You will also see an orange line along main line of I-4, and that represents the tube or the westbound express lane extension that comes all the way from Sandlake. Next slide, please. So the benefits of the phasing of, or the benefits of phase 1 of the 535 interchange improvements include that we are immediately addressing the critical ramp movements at this interchange. We are continuing the westbound improvements as we are also continuing the westbound single express lane extension. And we are also going to minimize throwaway in the future, as this interchange and ramp configuration is the ultimate configuration for this part of the interchange. Advancing construction will also facilitate future maintenance of traffic for the phase 2 of the interchange. And then we are building phase 2 in the future will allow more flexibility for future rail in the area. We're also advancing major utility relocation, which is going to help us in the future for phase 2. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a graphical representation of the last portion of that single westbound express lane will look like. So you have the typical section shown in here, and then the limits of that project that will be going into construction with the 535 interchange improvements. Next slide, please. So here we have some of the critical key dates for our schedule. We are currently in the advertisement phase for this project. It's a design build project. Critical date is the federal authorization or the final RFP is in October of this year. And it's a critical date that's tied to the TIP-STIP amendment for that will give us the ability to move forward with this project. And then we anticipate the letting in May of next year. At this point, I'm gonna turn it back to Adam so he can discuss the rest of the projects.
Okay, thank you, Catalina. So that takes care of 2 projects out of the 4 project numbers we have. So the last 2 project numbers I'm going to go over with on the next slide. So the first one is the 44315-3, which is the single lane express lane in the westbound direction. This one has different limits, starts from west of 528 to end of 536. Really, this one was in last year's TIP amendment, and due to administrative omission, we had to do a manual roll forward. So, this is not the first time this shows here, but again, this is that single lane express lane buffer separated in the westbound direction. So that's one project. This project goes with the next one, which is a 44315-1. Again, this one was on the last year's TIP, and the scope has not changed. It's the same exact project. Again, due to that manual roll forward, it's coming back again this time. This project is just interchange improvements along I-4 at Sand Lake Road, also some improvements on Turkey Lake Road. So that kind of takes care of the projects we have for you today. Any questions for me or Catalina?
Let's do this. I didn't get to introduce that. This is asking for our recommended approval for an amendment to the transportation improvement plan to include. I'll start again so that you can hear me. I didn't have the microphone. This is asking for our recommended approval for the amendment to the transportation improvement plan to include 4 specific projects. Okay, at this point, I will entertain a motion, and then we'll. Okay.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Who gave us the first? Okay. Mr. Hanlon and Mr. Shaw, Dr. Shaw. Okay, now, I'm sure we have questions. We'll start right here with our Vice Chairman, Dr. Danson.
Oh, thank you very much. I was going to defer to Ms. Webster. She was first, but thank you very much.
We'll go this way.
On your first slide, you actually mentioned a better I-4. And, and I've heard, this in, the service of MetroPlan before. That's where we got the phrase, I-4 ultimate. And now all of a sudden we've got the beyond the ultimate. I'm unconvinced. I have a hard time throwing money in the same direction. I mean, I saw all of your maps and everything else, and I can understand that, but there are a number of things that I did not see in there. For example, how are pedestrians getting from one side of, the Disney Plaza out there to the other? I don't know. Have you ever walked out there?
Yeah, I mean, we're familiar with it.
I'm just telling you, you take your life in your hands if you do that. We are building a huge monstrosity, And I'm unconvinced. I really will have a hard time voting for this for any more, major highway construction projects like this. I guess my question would be, I saw one thing in there which was you're going to accommodate future rail in the eastbound lanes of I-4, right? But does DOT have anything on their radar for transit other than this big highway project?
So we are in continuous discussions with the rail Brightline. They're still in preliminary phase of where their alignment is going to go. But if we look at the PD&E, we have the rail alignment in the median. Now there are chances that can change, but we are in continuous coordination with them. On that specific topic. So that is your question. That's the only alternative.
So basically, that's somebody else putting in rail out there, but DOT is just building highways. And they're not even really accommodating any other modes of transportation other than car users at this time. That's what I see.
On I-4 main line, that is correct. On the interchanges and the side streets, we accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists. That's something we do on every single project, part of our safety initiative. So as far as I-4 main corridor, the I-4 main line, that is correct. But as far as the interchange and the side roads, we do accommodate pedestrians and bicycles and other modes of transportation. Yes.
I remain. So, thank you for your
One
presentation.
person,
sir.
one vote. Okay. Ms. Webster, do we have any other questions on this side so that we can keep this moving? Ms. Webster? Ms. Counsel? Ms. Webster, you're next. You're recognized.
Mine relates to what you were just talking about. How do these interchange improvements facilitate a train from Orlando to Tampa? Because I think the train is a necessity. And you've kind of said that's a separate issue, but FDOT is not involved with mass transit or trains?
We're always coordinating with them on that. It's not separate. There's always coordination. Those two have to go together. We're waiting on funding. They are waiting on funding. So we're always talking to them, make sure that, it makes sense. Then there's no throwaway.
So how do these improvements, relate to a train going in? You said the train would be moved from the center, and you didn't really say to where. I would like some of those questions answered. I'm not prepared to support this at this time.
Okay.
Is there anyone that can answer that for us?
So again, the PD&E, the I-4 PD&E, we have the rail corridor in the median of I-4, so that's in our documents, and we're accommodating that, with our projects. So the median is the official location for the train alignment. If the party is looking to change that, they coordinate with us and they talk to us, to make sure that our projects and their project were aligned and they can be built in a way that makes sense. So that's definitely something we're always working on.
So these improvements take into account keeping the train line in the median?
That's part of the PD&E documents. That is correct. It's in the median of I-4.
But you suggested that might change. Is that per a request from the train people? I don't know who's doing
Right. That's kind of beyond my role here for these projects. We don't anticipate the impact of that rail. So the Sand Lake Road, the 4 projects we have here.
But we
today.
do need to be coordinating.
Absolutely.
Between those two. So
Absolutely.
what is the connection and how do we do that?
Absolutely, and I'll refer back to Catalina's point at the beginning. We are, getting the answers of that and this, the future of I-4, and we're committed to come back sometime end of this year, early next year, to present that information as it becomes more solid and more, something that we can confirm. So So we're looking at maybe end of this year or early next year. We'll come back with more information at that time.
And who is the body that the train people work with? The Federal Railroad Association or?
So there are a couple of stakeholders. You have Brightline. We work with other
I'm aware of Brightline.
Yes. You know, the Sunshine Corridor. I believe there are a couple of members. Part of that. So we coordinate with them.
So the Sunrail portion of it, which would be the Central Florida Commuter Rail, is prior to the convention center, so it wouldn't affect.
For these projects, the 4 projects we have today, the Sand Lake Road interchange with the single lane express lane, that's before 528, so we don't anticipate impact from the rail. It's not impacting that. The other interchange of 535, we're only building the western portion and the single lane express in the westbound direction, so that, again, that's not in conflict for regardless where they're going. So for those 4 projects, we don't see any impacts. And again, we continue to talk to them, frequently. It's just, like you said, they have to be built in a way that makes sense. You cannot build the rail and then just
Right.
come back and build I-4. You cannot build I-4 and then come back, build the rail. They have to be done
Absolutely.
in a way that makes sense and is more, it's just the best use of taxpayers' money. So we are very aware of that. These are very good points. Again, we can come back later this year when we have more solid information. I believe they just received a grant for rail design, so they just started some design.
Brightline.
Correct.
And there
So
was some matching
They
funds.
just started that. It's preliminary, really preliminary. We don't have anything solid, but we continue to talk to them all the time. So hopefully within the next month, we'll have a better picture that we can present to the group. But again, that's a very good point. We always take that into account when we're looking at I-4. So.
Okay, sounds like we're going to hear a lot more about this soon. Okay, we're not prepared to answer all the questions today. But Ms. Counsel,
Thank you so much. I have to agree with Dr. Stevens. I'm a little bit confused with the slide that went up that said it was on our list last year, and now it's back on our list again this year, but it still wasn't done last year. And then this is like a community, group here. So we're concerned with the safeties of all of these areas, of the crosswalks, and what's gonna be done, because if you're making these roads bigger and all of this, you gotta come in here with exactly how our community is gonna be protected on the streets, how our bicyclists are gonna be protected. We saw, all of the diagrams and the pretty little colors going around in circles like this, but you didn't show me specifically where our safety for our walkers, our bicyclists, where the bus stops or anything that's gonna be for children. I need to see that. And when you come in front of us, then you gotta be prepared for all of our, concerns. She's gonna be concerned about one part, she's gonna be concerned about that bright line. That bright line means a lot to all of us. You're not gonna come in here and show us some slides and then not show us where the bright line was changed to. So I'm just like a little bit confused with everything, and I'm sorry. I'm real passionate about my city, so.
It's
Thank you
not
so
that
much.
we're here to dump on you. It's just we have
That's very good feedback. Yeah.
inquiring minds like to know. Okay. But again, we're going to go to this. Anyone else over here? Otherwise, we're going to move to this side, and I will ask again. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I just put this up, thank you.
Okay, well, we're not going to back up. This is
Okay,
only
I'm sorry.
one.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. I'm just sitting here thinking, you're talking about tax dollars, my tax dollars. How much of the tourism tax dollars is being contributed? Is being contributed toward this project, which is really benefiting the tourist industry, which I'm happy that we have the tourist industry, but just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do not have the answer to that now, but we'll be happy to get that back to you. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate your honesty on that. Okay, moving to this side. Mr. Spila.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so a couple quick things. Sand Lake Road interchange, I've been a major hater of that interchange for well over 20 years, so it would be a privilege to be the first to take a shovel to the intersection. But I wish it was separated out from this proposal because it is the other project south of this. I agree with the rest of this committee. Are they really necessary? My main concern is the timing on improvements happening along I-4 south of that going into the Champions Gate area where the bottleneck is really the source of this problem. Because the congestion through the Champions Gate area down to Highway 27 is happening in both directions for hours at a time, practically 7 days a week. So what is the timing on those improvements? And once those improvements are made, and even if they're quick fixes like part-time shoulder driving to add capacity, whatever we can do to get traffic through that area faster, will then this extra capacity be necessary if the core problem, which is the Champions Gate area, gets solved first? That's my question.
Yeah, great question. That's actually not the first time we hear this feedback. We are aware of that, and I will refer back to Catalina's statement. We will have some better vision sometime end of this year, early year, just based on the information we have. Down there, again, we have the 532 interchange, I think finishing up construction. We also have the aux lanes from 532 to 429 in each direction. So that's kind of the near-term improvement. Long-term goals, this is not the first time we hear this. Definitely, we were aware of that, and there's something in the works. So we think we'll be ready to share sometime end of this year or next year. Catalina?
Yeah, it's part of the bigger picture, and this is why we knew this question, you were gonna have all these questions, is how does what we're doing now fit in with the bigger picture? And we're very confident that by the end of this year, we're gonna be able to tell you what we've been working on and how all of this fits in the bigger picture. We are aware of those backups. We see them daily, and we know we have to do something. And we're really looking at ways and what's the best way to address that traffic demand? How can we piece it into smaller projects? Is there a way to find more resources to fund our projects? And speaking of funding, there was a question earlier about tourism taxes. I want to let you know that our projects are they receive funding from either state or federal funding. We don't have any source of tourism taxes to fund the BTU projects. The way that we're able to move forward with the projects, the majority that you see here in the screen right now is the ARPA funding, the American Rescue Plan funding, is the stimulus funding, and it was an opportunity that we were given those funds, and yes, we're going to take the fundings that's available to at least start working on fixing the traffic demands in the areas, in those critical areas of I-4. And we're going to continue to look for ways to receive as much funding as we can to continue going south as well as north.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, let's see. Good morning, Ms. Mormon. Ms. White, I didn't see you come in. Okay, we'll turn the corner to Mr. O'Hanlon.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. This section down here has been an embarrassment for Central Florida for decades. It is amazing that we're finally going to fix some of it, even if it's just a small piece. It's amazing. We're working with the Beyond the Ultimate, so these pieces don't have to be redone. And you're doing a good expenditure of tax dollars that we all pay. We hate paying, but if you can use them better than we can, then that works for me. You keep on talking about tax dollars, tourist dollars. My wife and I will no longer do business in Polk County because this road is that bad. And it's not only us. Countless people won't even go down there anymore because this road is so bad. So thank you for coming here, and we look forward to these improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Hamlin. Ms. Pizzo, you're recognized.
Come on. Good morning, and thank you for a good presentation. My questions are going to be very quick. You talk about the possibility of the train, Bright Line, coming through at some point and utilizing this corridor. On these interchange improvements, is consideration being given as to whether you need to raise the height of those interchange to provide the train to go under? Or is there another route that the trains are taking?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We do take into account the rail corridor. In the PD&E concept, it's in the median, so we always look at that as we're developing our concepts. We continue to talk to Brightline, and as soon as they share information, we coordinate that with our projects. So again, for these 4 projects, the first 2 on top, we don't anticipate. Actually, for all of them, we don't anticipate impact from Brightline because just the location of the first 2 on top are before 528. The single lane westbound express lane, that's clear of them. And then the interchange, 535, is we're doing the western portion first. So we think we're in good shape as far as the Brightline alignment.
And I will also like to add that, yes, we know the clearances that are needed for Brightline trains. And in those areas where Brightline and the majority of I-4, so like at 535, I-4 goes over 535. So the rail will have to go over 535 as well. But we are looking at horizontal clearance and vertical clearance that is required to clear those trains. And we are working with, like Adam has said, working with Brightline, open communication, and they are aware of these projects that are moving forward. And again, later in at the end of this year, we are certain that we're gonna have a better picture, including Brightline. They are actively looking at what's the best project for the area as a whole.
Okay, Mr. Pegram, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So based on publicly available information, I think I'm going to try to provide some clarity, and our DOT and Metro Plan partners can certainly help clarify more. But from what I understand publicly is the intent is the DOT would be the body that would apply for federal funding for rail infrastructure from the airport to Disney, beyond the convention center all the way down to Disney. And so that would be where the request for federal funding would be, because not only would Brightline be a user of that corridor, but that would be commuter rail as well, with potentially more interim stations where they could interchange with the current Sunrail that Brightline may not do. And then beyond Disney would be Brightline's bonds funded for that portion. So I believe there is a cohesive DOT being the lead agency to potentially request federal funding for that infrastructure. I believe there is coordination between the work that you're doing here and DOT taking the lead with that project. So I think your concerns about who's doing what and where, I think there is a little more cohesiveness that we may not have been updated on, but that's at least what I know from publicly available information of who's paying for what and where. My question would be on the tube work. I know you presented that previously as an immediate need, and now there's more federal funding available than there was to advance the other phases of the project. When we talk about use of taxpayer dollars, I guess I need to understand there's roughly 44 feet of median to work with right now in that corridor. And so when we look at building these other phases and you bid to a contractor, the existing condition would be you have 44 feet to store materials, store trucks and equipment. But now we're building this tube that's going to encroach on that space. And I'm assuming DOT is going to require that tube to be operational throughout the construction of all these permanent phases. What is the impact of that from a construction standpoint? If the tube provides an economic value of time saved of $300 million to the economy, but because we've constricted the contractor's ability to do the work in the existing corridor, it's going to extend the schedule and the cost of beyond the ultimate $400 million. Well, that would seemingly be a $100 million deficit economically. So I need to kind of understand what's the trade-off of if we do versus if we don't, and if there's other measures we could do in lieu of constricting space to get the work done.
Yeah, that's a good question. So as far as construction staging, the median of I-4 could be one of the locations, but there are other areas within the interchange limits that the contractor can use for staging and for equipment and for construction. For example, the 535 interchange, since let me just go to the slide. So the top right corner, that's, the department was able to purchase that property, Crossroads, so we own that property. And the contractor actually can build the majority of this interchange offline. So if anything, it will be built quicker than the normal, just because the property we acquired and the way the construction sequencing is worked. So we do take into account that kind of information. And yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So, yeah.
I would also like to add that the single westbound express lane, the tube, is also going to help us for future MOT phases. So when the Beyond the Ultimate comes in this area, is going to reconstruct main line of I-4, and this tube is in a way going to serve us as an MOT phase. We're going to be able to reuse that asphalt when we do pavement shifts on I-4 to build, one side and build the other. So this is actually, we're going to be able to get more out of this tube during future MOT phases.
I had a comment regarding, like, this is a good slide. I see for Palm Parkway and Violent Avenue, what are the exact plans? Like, are you expanding that? Because I know when I go around those areas, what I understand to me, the biggest traffic created there is pretty much a signal timing issue, that the lights, it just takes forever to turn, and at least to 535 from Violent and from Parkway to 535. So I just was wondering, similar to me what David was saying earlier, that what are the little projects that can be done apart from just expanding I-4 and just seeing signal timing in that area. And then added on, I know for the last presentation we had about this, we talked a lot about capacity and how this will only really much serve at least population in the next 10 years. So I just wanted to see where that is right now with the capacity still, and if the numbers are still the same, because I didn't see capacity anywhere in this presentation.
Yeah. Thank you. Good question. So for Palm Parkway, there's actually laser. I wish I knew that. Okay. So right now, there's a left turn and a right, I think dual lefts and right turn. So what we're doing, part of this project, we're extending the storage length of the left turn lanes and the right turn lanes, which, we think that will, improve and alleviate some of the congestion at Palm Parkway intersection. Like you mentioned, it's a congested intersection. At Hotel Plaza Boulevard, what we're doing is, if you're traveling on 535 north, to get into I-4, you just take this loop ramp and you go into I-4. So this intersection is proposed to be a T intersection, so it's no longer a plus intersection. So we're taking out some phases of the signal timing, and you have that free flow left turn movement. So definitely enhancement to overall traffic along 535 part of this project. We do have pedestrian facilities and crossings as well, part of this. So those some of the improvements we're doing part of this project. I hope I answered your question. Another improvement, the off ramp, the westbound off ramp. Right now we are seeing spillback onto the I-4 general use lanes. So with this concept, we're realigning that and extending it. Also allows for more storage on the ramp itself. So we're looking at improvements along I-4 and also 535 as well. For your second part of your question, you mentioned 10 years. For this, we looked at design year for 20 years. 20 years for design year. So we think this concept is will give you good years for traffic. So it can handle traffic for long years. So, yep.
We're now ready to vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposes? Okay, so we're going to call the roll.
Beltran. Bovinger.
Nay.
Bosley. Buttery. Campbell.
Nay.
Coleman. Cologne.
She called Coleman.
Cortez.
Nay.
Council.
Nay.
Davis.
Aye.
Henry,
Nay.
Lassard, Lopez,
Nay.
Mormon, Mott,
Aye.
Mueller,
Aye.
O'Hanlon,
Yes.
Peters, Pigram, Pizzo,
Aye.
Rumpf,
Can I abstain?
I vote.
I guess yes.
Okay.
Saavedra, Salas,
Aye.
Shaw, Sabilla,
Nay.
Stevens,
No.
Webster,
No.
White,
Nay.
Mr. Chair, we have 14 members that voted no and 11 that voted yes.
Okay, looks like doesn't carry in this case. But we will hear about this again, correct? This will come back. Okay? Thank you so much. Right, it did not carry. That's what I said.
You can remind them it's a recommendation to the board.
Right, and this is a recommendation to the board. So when I meet with the board, I will give them our feelings, our recommendation, okay? But we'll hear about this one again. Okay, thank you so much again. We have 3 presentations today. We will hold questions until the end of the presentation. Committee members, please stand your nameplate on the end to signal that you want to ask a question. You will be recognized at the end. Our first presentation, we have a presentation from Mr. Jason Leonard. Who are you with, Jason? Who are you with?
I'm with the Florida Department of Transportation.
Okay, you are with FDOT. Okay. About the process for classifying roads and updating the urban area boundaries. So you have our attention.
All right, thank you.
Hit the button right in the center on the bottom, on the screen.
There you go.
There you go.
All right, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Jason Learned with the Florida Department of Transportation, and the presentation here is to provide initial information about the upcoming process for updating the functional classification of roadways and the urban boundary, which is the federal highway urban boundary. And this happens every 10 years after the census. As you know, 2020 was a census year, and all that census information is being processed. And this is a process that takes a few years, and it is a coordination effort between FDOT and our local MPOs. So the presentation at a glance, I'd like to give everybody a background about what all of this is, and then provide a general schedule, and then provide you with the process of how this update will occur. So, like I mentioned before, we just had a census in 2020, and the urban areas are revised every 10 years based on the population counts. And we also review the functional classification every 10 years after the census, concurrent with adjusting the urban boundary. So the urban boundaries are actually created by the Census Bureau, and we can refine them as a prerogative as being a state agency. And that is something called the Federal Highway Urban Boundary, which is a little bit different from the census urban boundary. And I'll get into more of that in just a few minutes. So what is the functional classification of roadways? It is a method to assign the public roadways into classifications according to the character of service they provide as part of the roadway network. And there is a hierarchy of classifications. And they range from your neighborhood streets that you all live on that provide you access to your properties, and then properties to businesses, to interstates, which are high-speed facilities that support the long-distance movement of people and goods. And access and mobility are considerations. Like I mentioned, neighborhood streets, they provide more of the access to properties and businesses, where those interstates provide the most mobility. So some local examples of the functional classification characteristics roads that we have. I-4 is a principal arterial interstate. Other freeways and expressways are 408, 417, and 429. Some of your principal arterials are Colonial, 1792, US 192. Some of your minor arterials are Seminole Boulevard, Carroll Street and Kissimmee, Curry Ford Road. Some of your major collectors are roads like Markham Woods Road, Weatherby, Lakeshore Boulevard. A minor collector, some examples are Old Hickory Tree Road, Lake Baldwin Lane. And some of your local streets are like Spring Valley Road, Ferguson Drive, Patrick Street. So this is just a graphic that gives you a visual interpretation of mobility versus accessibility, where your neighborhood streets, like I mentioned, provide access to your properties and businesses, but typically they have a low speed limit. If you want to travel a higher speed limit and you want to travel to a destination, you're going to most likely progress onto a road that is a collector and then end up an arterial. And if you're going a long distance trip to another area, you're going to most likely get on a freeway, which provides you the most mobility. So the FHWA, they provide a list of suggested ranges of mileage of each functional classification. And this is just a chart showing where Metro Plan Orlando, the Tri-County area, where those ranges fall. Those ranges are a suggestion. It's not a mandatory fit where we have to have X percent of arterials and X percent of collectors. They're just guidelines and suggestions that help the process move forward. And some of the observations that we had with observing the current functional classification of roads within the Metro Plan region is that we're a little bit lower in mileage on minor arterials. We're a little bit lower on mileage for minor collectors, and we have a high percentage of local streets. But local streets, since they consist of most of the mileage in the public roadways to begin with, so they're going to be high to begin with. So how is the functional classification of roadways applied? It can be a consideration of prioritization of projects. It can also be considered in roadway design and other considerations like the context classification of roadways. It defines data collected for performance management. Federal Highway collects data on roads, and some roads get data collected and some do not. So this would apply to that. And it also determines the the funding eligibility from certain sources. A big example that we're all used to is FEMA emergency response funding. After a hurricane, when roads need to be cleared, some roads, based on their functional classification, will be eligible to be reimbursed from FEMA for cleaning up debris and trees. So the urban boundary, moving into that, this is the line that distinguishes urban boundaries from rural areas. Urban areas from rural areas, excuse me. The 2020 census came up with a new approach of determining the urban boundary, which is moving from census tract and block population density to housing unit and development density. So that might have overreaching changes within the current urban boundary that we're still using from the 2010 census. So this is just a map showing the urban boundary, the existing urban boundary. It is in yellow, or it might be a little like a mustard color on your screen. And then you have the roads functionally classified. You can look at the map to see which colors correspond to which functional classification. And the same functional classification carries with the road, even if it moves into an urban or rural area. It's just, we also break those down by urban and rural as well. So if a roadway is a principal arterial in an urban area, it's still going to be a principal arterial in a rural area as well. But we break down those classifications. So like I mentioned, the federal aid highway system funding, there are some implications for funding. For example, in rural areas, minor collectors are not eligible for that FEMA funding, that reimbursement that happens when a disaster happens. And local roads are not eligible at all for that funding as well. So the general schedule, right now we're having our initial meetings with all of our MPOs and their committees to inform you that we're starting this process. And we're going to be coming back as the Census Bureau releases their urban areas for 2020. They were supposed to be released several months ago, but they've had some delays in their schedule. And then in winter 2022 and spring 2023, the USDOT will designate transportation management areas. That really doesn't have any implications for Metro Plan because that really only applies to 2 of our more smaller MPOs within District 5, so that won't have any bearing of anything here within the Tri-County area. And so, like I mentioned, this is part of our initial outreach, this meeting is, and then we'll also go into the other presentations as we go through this process and give the MPO committees as well as the general public time to provide comments. And then we'll also be reaching out to get approval once everything is done. And we do this separately for the functional classification and then the urban boundary. So this is just a schedule of some of the meetings that we've had already. We've got one more initial meeting with the Space Coast TPO. And then we're also going through a quality control review of the current functional classification data and identifying new roadways and existing roadways that have been modified and other changes. So some of the key players in this is the Federal Highway Administration. They have to sign off on this. And we also coordinate with our folks in Tallahassee at the Transportation Data Analytics Office. And then, of course, FDOT District 5, our office signs, and then the MPOs and TPOs also have to sign off on this. So for the contact for this, Alice Giuliani is the project manager. She cannot be here this morning, so I'm in her place. Her contact information is there. We also have our consultants from Kimley Horn right here that have been providing support to us as well. I can also be a contact. I'm more in the behind the scenes working through all this. And of course, the MPO contact here at MetroPlan is Alex Trauger, which I'm sure most of you know already and have his information. So just some last notes. This is the initial outreach. This is a very important process, and your participation will be very important and welcome. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. In all fairness, we'll go this week to start. Did you tell us some of the roads that would be considered for the FEMA reimbursement?
Okay, so let me go back. So they're based on classifications, and I do not have an exhaustive list. Let me go back here. So this is just some examples. This is by no means an exhaustive list. Probably the local streets that you live on, I'm assuming that you all live in neighborhoods tucked away from major roadways. I'm assuming that you all don't have a house right on Cimarron Boulevard or some road like that. So in all likelihood, the streets that you live on, those personal streets, are not going to be their local roadways, and they're not going to be eligible.
If you think something, we will take your question afterwards, so you can get answers for you. Ms. Rump?
Thank you very much. I'd just like to know the boundary for
Yes.
District 5, the area boundary, the north boundary road, the south, or you cover District 5, right?
Yes.
Which counties?
Oh, which counties? So it's 9 counties. It's Orange, Osceola, and Seminole, Volusia, Brevard, Flagler, Lake Sumter, and Marion.
Okay, so I'm concerned about Orange County.
Okay?
So can I get some kind of either map later on to show me what areas and the boundaries, the road boundaries for Orange County?
Yes, so as part of the public outreach and comments, we're going to be providing an online map. Everything is going to be in map form, and it's going to be colorized like that map that we had back here with all the different colors for each classification. And that's what's going to be presented to the public to provide comments on. So, and that's going to be, it's going to show the entire district, but since your comments are strictly for Orange County, I'm sure you'll just be focusing on the Orange County part.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you.
Ms. Council, ready?
I'm glad that you have that slide up. Those circles that you have in certain areas, could that be the possible areas that they're gonna start with? Because when you say 192, 192 is a very long strip, and we need help throughout all of 192. So I'm gonna hold you to any part that you say of 192 right now.
okay. So those circles right here, those are actually showing where the road meets the boundaries
Okay.
and where they change from urban to rural. So with regards to the urban boundaries, one of the minimum requirements for doing the smooth boundary for the FHWA boundary is it has to, at a minimum, take the current census boundary. And I don't know of the history here with MetroPlan, but there have been other areas in Florida that have contested those boundaries. Miami-Dade NPO was a great example of that. So we're going to hope that nobody contests the results of the census and that urban boundary, and that we can move forward. Now, as far as you're concerned with US 192, US 192 is a principal arterial, and it's going to remain a principal arterial. That's the current classification for that, and nothing's going to change on that, because the major roads here, most of them are not going to change.
Okay.
It's going to be more with new roads and roads that have been extended.
But 192 is a very long, so is it all of 192?
Yes, all of
Okay.
192, basically the entire length of it in our district, from US 27 all the way to A1A, excuse me, it's all principal arterial.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Anyone else over here? Okay. Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have a presentation next from Ms. Michelle Kendall of WSP Consultants on transforming the management of Sunrail from FDOT to local government jurisdictions. Ms. Kendall,
Good morning.
you have our
Good
attention.
morning.
Thank you. We're excited to be here today. This is a project that we've been working on for about a year and a half now. And what it is, it's the Sunrail Transition Plan. So it's looking at how you take Sunrail from being managed by FDOT to the local funding partners. And the local funding partners are Orange, Osceola, Seminole, Volusia, and the City of Orlando. So what we wanted to do today is tell you about where we're at with the study. And it's a really good timing to be in front of you because we anticipate that at the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission in September on the 22nd. They should be taking a vote on what the governance structure is going to look like. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So I know everybody is pretty familiar with Sunrail, but I wanted to go over kind of very quickly how we got to where we are today. So this has been, Sunrail, as you know, has been in the works for many, many years. Back in 2007, the Interlocal Agreements were approved, which kind of laid the foundation for how the different funding partners operate with FDOT. The governor approved the project in 2011. Several different items to point out. This indicated that FDOT was going to be responsible for the design, the permitting, and the construction of the system. And then they were going to be responsible for paying for that system for 7 years, beginning in May 2014. So obviously that 7 years would take you to 2021. We're in 2022. And the reason why we're in 2022 is because when they decided to extend Phase 2 North up to DeLand, that came with an extension of the time. FDOT said, we're not going to turn it over until the whole system is up and running, and we've gone through, the commissioning to make sure everything is running appropriately. So that's bumped the time frame out. So we're looking at now roughly June 2024 as that anticipated turnover date. However, that is a very rough date because, as you know, again, it's contingent upon when Phase 2 North is completed. With labor shortages, with material shortages, all of those things could push that out a little bit because we're not exactly certain on when that date is going to be. Again, Sunrail is the 61 miles, 4 counties, 17 stations. Generally, it operates Monday through Friday. Again, it was developed as a commuter rail system, so people commuting to and from work. But as you've seen, there are opportunities when it runs for sporting events and different things like that. But generally, Monday through Friday operation. Phase 1 began in 2014. Phase 2, the southern extension, opened in 2018, and now, like I said, we're estimating the northern extension ready in 2024. Here's the system map. I think y'all are pretty familiar with that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this transition analysis process that we've been working through. There's several different elements of the study. We're looking at, lessons learned from other systems. What are the contracts and agreements that need to be in place? What does the governance structure look like? What is the staffing? What do the finances look like? So there's a lot of different components that will be recommendations in this plan. Right now, we finished the initial transition analysis report, which is kind of existing conditions. Where are we now? Where do we need to be going? We need that decision on the governance structure to be made next month, and then we'll move forward with the transition plan that lays out the next steps that the committee is going to need to take. As part of that, we've looked at Sunrail in several different areas. The first thing we looked at was an operational analysis. What does it physically look like? Are the local funding partners going to be inheriting a system that's running well, or are there some issues? So the really good news is that we went out and took a look at it. It's generally in a very good state of good repair. FDOT has been doing an excellent job in maintaining the system. So Federal Railroad Administration, which oversees it, has been very happy with how things have been running. So that was very good news for the local funding partners. FDOT is going to be handing over a system that's in really good shape. One of the recommendations, though, is that because there is a couple of years before that will turn over, is we'd want to take another look at just to make sure that everything has progressed as planned. There's no reason to expect that it wouldn't, but before it's turned over, you would do a final check on that. The governance structure. This is key right now, and this is what I mentioned they're going to hopefully be voting on next month. We looked at it and developed 3 different options for how Sunrail could be run. As you're familiar, there's the CFCRC, the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission that exists today. That would continue in all 3 options. Under the first option, the CFCRC would become a full agency. They would have all of the staffing in-house. There would be roughly 200 positions. It would oversee everything related to Sunrail. Under the second option, there would be some staff in-house that would provide management and administrative functions, but a lot of the systems would be contracted out, which is essentially how FDOT currently runs. The third option was to look at an existing entity. That existing entity would manage it, but again, the CFCRC board still remains intact. And there's pros and cons that come with each of the different options. Quickly, some of the considerations. Option 1 is the most expensive because you have 200 positions in-house. Also because 200 positions have to be hired, it would take a very long time to do. There's not an extensive market of people that have been working on rail in the state of Florida, so you'd have to do recruiting from elsewhere, which could be done, but it would take some work. You would have a whole new agency, so everything that goes with creating a whole new agency goes along with that. The administrative processes, HR, procurement, all those entities have to be created. They'd also need to look at office space. And then FRA, which we mentioned now, has been really happy with how Sunrail is running, and they have that comfort level. You know, they would have to get used to a new agency, so there would be a little bit of concern over creating that. The second option is the second most expensive. It requires about 50 employees, which is still a good number to hire, but less than the first option. A big thing with this is that the risk would be shed. So with the commission, all of the risk, if something were to happen, resides with the commission. When you take it and you have contracting entities, the risk gets shifted to those. So which is definitely a positive. And then as you would have some continued contractors, FRA would anticipate being confident still in how it would operate. The third option, we looked at several different entities that could provide that service. We looked at Lynx as one of the options, we looked at CFX as one of the options, and we looked at Brightline. We did an extensive analysis with the steering group and the working group, and Lynx rose to the top based on a broad series of evaluation factors. It's also the least expensive because you're working with an existing agency. You don't have to create things from scratch. They've already got staff in place. An HR department doesn't have to hire up. It already exists. So that is option 3 that we're looking at right now. And just to kind of go back to that again, this is what the CFCRC board is voting on next month. Critical decision, because we have to, in order to determine how you're going to move forward and identify those steps to completion, you have to understand what the operating entity is going to look like. So that governance decision is really important. We also did a lot of looking at the financials. Generally, there's 4 different types of costs, which make up the bulk of the expenses for Sunrail: insurance costs, operating costs, the capital funding plan, and then station maintenance costs. And just to break it down into a little bit more detail, those operating costs, operations and maintenance for the system, the fuel costs, the consultant support, feeder bus service. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the cost allocation. So when you look at Sunrail, and this is one of the huge points of discussion right now, right? How are we paying for it? So when we developed what those costs would be, we looked at what are the operating costs now, what are they anticipated to be, what is the revenue coming in from the operations, the fare box collection revenue, the advertising revenue, some of the lease revenues, and then you have your deficit. What are you left with the 5 funding partners having to pay for? So we looked at it in terms of embarkings and disembarkings, so the percentage of where people get on the stations, in what locations, and came up with a percentage. And then we took that, and we also, we averaged it. So we looked at the total embarkings and disembarkings and did an average. So we've come up with a rough percentage. So for example, Volusia County would be responsible for about 9.5% of the cost of the operating deficit in each of the counties and the cities, so forth. We also looked at the capital plan, which is the maintenance for the station, for the tracks, for the vehicle overhauls. And the way that those costs were allocated were based on track miles. So instead of determining the local funding partners share based on where people get on and off, it was the track miles. Because if you have more track miles, you're obviously going to have more expenses. So that's how the percentages for those were derived. And then we looked at the revenues. Amtrak uses the line as well. So they have a certain percentage that they pay to FDOT. There's advertising, there's fare box collections, all of those items. So in this slide, what we're looking at is the three different options in the cost comparison, which is one of the deciding factors in how it's going to be run. So if you can look over to the 2029 costs, which we looked at the 5-year out projection, option one, as we discussed, is the most expensive, around $65 million to be shared amongst the 5 entities. Option two at about 63, and then option three, which we're looking at Lynx as the operating agency, is about 54. And that's, again, because you have an existing agency in place, so you don't have to create a lot of those things that you would have to with the other two options. And this is just a lot more numbers, kind of backing into that, showing the range. And it's important, every time you put numbers out there, it's really hard because they're always projections and they're always based on the current best information that you have. But we included a cost factor of a plus or minus of about 10%, because it's never going to be exact. What we're projecting now is never going to be exactly the number that happens in 2024. So these are best estimations based on all of the key information that we have right now. So kind of in summing up, there's several different activities that we need to look for, that we're looking at to move this through implementation. The decision on the governance structure is the first one. And then looking at all of the different items underneath it will continue. Some of them, the financial, the capital delivery, we're already working on. But a lot of the rest of these are contingent upon that decision on the governance structure. So next steps. We've been doing briefings throughout the summer, continuing into the fall. We're hopefully anticipating a decision on that governance structure September 22nd. From then, we'll be developing the final transition plan, which is an exhaustive look at, okay, now that you've decided on the structure, what are all of those things that have to fall into place to make that transition occur in the summer of 2024? And then once we have that plan, the CFCRC will adopt that plan. So that is a very quick overview of about 18 months of work to date. We're excited about this moving forward, but this is really at a critical point right now where we're making this decision on the future of Sunrail. It is so critical to the region. And with that completes my presentation. I am.
Okay. Mr. Davis, you are recognized.
I have a couple of questions / observations, I guess.
Your microphone, yeah.
Couple of questions / observations. I'm assuming currently at the stations, the costs are split somehow between Lynx and Sunrail?
The costs are already have been distributed amongst the local funding partners, so those will continue as is.
But part of that's allocated to Sunrail and then split, however, and part of it's allocated to the Lynx portion of the, or is all of the stations a Sunrail expense?
All of the stations, the upkeep on the stations is a local expense. So whichever jurisdiction those stations are in, those jurisdictions are paying for that expense.
Okay.
Lynx provides the feeder bus service to the station, and then Sunrail or FDOT maintains the track, the crossings, and all of that.
Parking lot, intersections, lighting?
Yes.
Is FDOT?
I need to double check on the parking lots and the lighting.
Okay. Has anyone looked into, if this goes into Lynx, how it'll reduce their existing cost of operations through efficiencies or scale?
We have, and yeah, that's a really good point, and that's one of the reasons why those costs for Lynx are lower, because there are efficiencies, because you have an existing agency. Just a couple of examples. You've already got a procurement division. You've already got an HR department. You've already got, a financial. So we looked at the staffing of Lynx as it currently exists, and we also looked at the staffing of what we would need in addition to the current staff. So we would be looking at roughly 9 brand new positions that would supplement Lynx's staff. Some of Lynx's staff already has good qualifications with rail, but there are certain positions that would be needed to strengthen that. And then there would be a portion of existing staff time, which we've done a detailed evaluation on as well, that would be needed to help with Sunrail. So there's definitely efficiencies.
Okay, but, so are you telling me, let's take the CFO position just to grab one. The way that would be reallocated so that the cost of the existing operation, his portion of that fee would be lower towards the Lynx portion of the operation. That's included in your total savings?
So right now, FDOT essentially provides all of those management services. So
For Sunrail?
for Sunrail,
Right.
correct. So if Lynx were to be the option that operated it, there would be a portion of the current CFO's time that would need to be dedicated to Sunrail.
Correct. So instead of, just a really simplistic view, instead of 100% of his cost, whatever that may be, going to the Lynx side of their balance sheet or their P&L.
I understand what you're asking now.
90% of it would be allocated to Lynx and maybe 10% of it goes to Sunrail. That 10% savings is calculated and it shows up where? As far as Lynx's existing operation. I understand it'll be bundled back into one conglomerate, but
Yeah, it's in the operating cost that's factored into the overall, $54 million. It's been factored in there.
and it shows, like when you have option 3, the savings, you outline that's in that number.
Correct.
Okay. And then just to clarify in my head here, so now when you're allocating costs based on boardings, is that a little misleading? Because isn't I would think the boardings is the further you get away from downtown, the less they are, either direction. You get to Point Santa, probably has some of the lower numbers. Downtown has probably higher numbers. Isn't the cost to provide that service to those outboard users higher than the section that's downtown?
Well, it's actually pretty interesting because downtown Church Street absolutely has one of the highest, boardings and lightings, yes.
Okay.
But then also the DeBerry station has a high number, and then the Tupperware station down in Meadowwoods also has a very high number. So there are stations kind of across the system that are higher and lower, but they do vary by county. And so that's why we looked at the boarding, where they're getting on and also where they're getting off. And then that's why we separated the capital costs into track miles, because that we thought was a more appropriate allocation.
But the operating portion, it obviously gets more expensive the further away you get from downtown.
Well, you have to look at it as the whole system. And so all of the 5 funding partners are going to be chipping in to pay for the operation of the entire 61 miles. So we came up with a percentage share based on where the ridership is higher and lower so that it would be as equitable as possible to those, so if Volusia doesn't have, Volusia I think was like maybe 9% because their ridership isn't as high as some of the other areas. Therefore, the percentage that they would be chipping in isn't as high.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming, but I'm not sure that's 100% accurate. I understand it's one way to do it, but let's say they have a large number of boardings, but the cost out there is way higher.
But the cost is the cost of a system. So if you're looking at operating the entire system, you have to operate it for the whole 61 miles. You can't really look at it as, we're only operating, because the trains are running the full length. They're not going,
Some total or an
But they
average.
wouldn't have
Right.
to at that point. I'm just saying. Okay.
Okay. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you. I would like to piggyback a little bit off of Mr. Davis about the cost of it. I come from Kissimmee and Osceola. So what I'm concerned is that by giving the smaller governments the Sunrail, that you'll be putting more of a financial strain on them. I've been taking public transportation for the last 3 months, Sunrail, Lynx, just to get a better understanding of it. And there are several times I get on Sunrail, and we don't even have to pay due to some kind of technical glitch. You just get on and get off, right? So I'm afraid that when you say that the place is, that Sunrail is in nice shape and it's ready to be given to the local communities, I would kind of like push back a little bit because I don't think that they are making money that can have an impact. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, so that's a really good point. So one of the big issues that FDOT has been having, and it has addressed, is the fare collection. So the system that they had put in place was not as effective as they anticipated. So to your point, a lot of times people would try and pay to get on, but they wouldn't be able to do it. FDOT has recognized that and is addressing that. So they have a new contract with a new company called Movell. They're putting new fare collection system in place. It will definitely be in place before 2024 on the transition. I need to find out the exact time. But that's one of the key ways that they can address that fare collection issue, because if you're standing at the platform, you want to buy a ticket and the fare system isn't working, what do? You're not going to not take the train. You've tried. So they've recognized it's an issue, and they're definitely addressing that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you see Ms. Mott?
No, I didn't. Ms. Mott, I'm sorry.
Me.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for that insightful presentation. Just had a quick question in reference to the composition of the committees. One of your slides previously showed that people involved were staffing, funding, governance, and something else along those lines, and it outlined committees. My question is centered around the composition of those committees, specifically at the citizen level. How many committees were there? What was the composition of the committees? And more specifically, what community slash civic involvement, citizen involvement did the committees comprise of?
So there's been a steering group, there's been a working group, and the working group, so the steering group includes all of the different local municipalities. The working group includes some municipalities as well as FDOT. There's also the technical advisory committee. So they're all the standing committees of the CSCRC as they currently exist. They've all been involved with the process, also the citizens committee. So we've done presentations for them throughout this process as well. So there's been at least, I think it's every month, we've been having steering group meetings. And then as the regularly scheduled Sunrail committee meetings are held, we present at those as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the rationale was specifically centered around like the involvement from the people that's going to be most impacted, quite frankly.
Oh, they've been heavily involved, absolutely.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, Ms. Council, did I miss you too?
We do a lot of events in the city of Kissimmee with Sunrail. It's our only station right there in the downtown area. It's kind of important to us. So the nonprofits, we all come together down there, and there is a liaison with Sunrail that comes out and does all of our kids' events. So we've been trying to give a lot of attention to the Sunrail down there, so then people can be able to use it more, because there's not too many people that jump on the station down there because of what he said. We can't find a ticket agent, you can't buy a ticket. And if you're there from a certain hour to a certain hour, you will find someone there for you to be able to get a question answered or something. But other than certain hours, then it's a ghost station. I would love to see Sunrail do more than just one or two major events. Like we have something called Boo on Broadway, which brings out to the Sunrail over 7,000 people, okay? This is done October 28th. I'd like to see Sunrail participate a little bit more, because that's where the station is at and that's where the party is. So they actually bring out all of the merchants of that whole Broadway area, and everybody's involved. So if Lynx can come out and all of those, you would see a lot of the attention of the community, especially on those big events, the Harry Potter event. We use the train as the Harry Potter whole theme, you know? So maybe if there's more collaborations, that's why option 3 looked really, really good at this point, for them to collaborate with organizations that are already existing and have, you know, the help that it needs to be able to continue. So I would love to see Sunrail come out just a little bit more than just once or twice a year. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to this side. We still have another presentation. I really want us to get to it. So Ms. Henry, you're next.
Thank you. Very good presentation. Just had a quick question. On the slide where you were showing the revenue impact or usage, you had Amtrak and CSX, and then there was a FCEN. What does that represent?
Florida East Coast
What
Railway. Florida East Coast?
East Coast. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Florida Central.
Oh, Florida Central. Sorry.
It's the one that runs in from the Eustis Lake County area.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Sabila, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, and I'm just not, I'm maybe in the dark on this, but was it always Sunrail's plan to be passed eventually down to the individual municipalities where it services? Okay.
Yes.
And are these municipalities budgeted for this, or is this going to be incremental? You know, say, for example, we have the voter tax coming up, so, who's covering these costs, I guess is my question.
So yes, it was always anticipated back in 2014 when those interlocal agreement, well, when Sunrail first started, and in 2011 when the interlocal agreement started, it was stated clearly in there that it was going to be turned over to the locals. So the locals have known for a long time that this was going to be coming. As to whether the different entities were budgeting for it, I would anticipate that they were, but I think it's one of those where things come closer and closer. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, this is really upon us now, right? Like if I know I have to buy a new roof and next year and I'm putting it off, well, all of a sudden next January I'm going to be like, oh shoot, I better have planned, well for that roof. So kind of along this way. So I think now everybody is looking at their budgets and have been for the last several years, knowing that this is going to be a decent expense for them, knowing that this is something that they would have to cover. So as part of this, we're not looking at how the locals pay for that. They are working on that internally. So I know they've been working very closely with staff across each of the counties in the city to identify how they're going to pay for their portion of it. Yes.
Mr. O'Hanlon.
Thank you. How many trips a day are taken on Sunrail?
I believe the ridership, and it's varied, obviously, since we're using the pre-COVID numbers, which were around 4,000 per day. But then obviously COVID has impacted, like it's impacted everything. So the ridership is a little bit down. I think it's in the high, like 3,800 range now, maybe. So it is coming back up. So it's making a return.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get these numbers right. It's about $60 million a year to operate the system, and you're collecting like 15 million?
Good point, exactly.
Okay, so basically, there's about a $45 million deficit?
Correct, and that's one of
So
the...
if you do that deficit over 256 a day that you operate, it costs $172,000 a day to operate the train?
Okay, so I'm not good with math on the fly, so I'm not going to be able to address
I'm
that.
I'm just doing it on the calculator, and let's just say there's 10,000 trips a day because everything's going to get so good, everybody's going to jump on the Sunrail, right? Okay, so then that would make it as $17 for every one of those trips, right? And if there's only 4,000 a day, that makes it 1734. It's $50 for every trip, okay? Now, I'm going to backtrack a bit because I totally supported Sunrail in the beginning because there was no technological solution to that problem other than a train for the past 200 years. Well, that's toast, okay? Because full self-driving, little minibuses that are got 10 passengers in them are going to be traveling all over our streets within 2 to 3 years, okay? They're going to cost less than 10 cents a mile, okay? So if you're doing half the route of 30 miles times 10 cents a mile, that's $3 a trip. And these things are going to run every 5 minutes. So you're going to get a lot more people in these little buses. So we're paying $50 a trip. And within 2 to 3 years, you can go every 5 minutes for $3 a trip. This technology is such a dinosaur, it's just not even funny. And I'll grant you, great, so you don't get this in 3 years, it takes 5 years. How much can we invest in, and you guys have heard me before, in dinosaur technology? Somebody's going to have to put their big boy hats on and say, hey, let's plan for the real future that's really coming. I'm beyond
I
dismayed.
know.
It doesn't matter what option you take, they're all bad.
Mr. Hamlin, we're with you, we understand. Ms. Pizzo.
Thank you. Yes and no. I agree and I don't agree, but I respect your passion. Michelle, as always, you do such a very thorough presentation. There's a lot of information in here. I just basically want to make a statement more than a question. Sunrail is touted as a commuter rail, yet it only runs 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I'm sorry, not everybody works 9 to 5. And I hear this so many times in my past life with the department and in my current life as a wonderful, happy retiree. Everybody's like, why is this? We want to use it, but I don't work 9 to 5. I have a job downtown as a bartender. I can't get there on Saturdays. I got to find a ride. It's wrong. It's wrong. And I hope that whatever the future holds for Sunrail, and I would like to see it succeed on some level. As we know, no transportation pays for itself. Roads don't, rails don't, nothing pays for itself. It's a hard fact of life. But I would love to see consideration given that Sunrail become a true commuter rail, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. That's my, thank you.
Mr. Pegram,
So-
you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So first, I want to make sure to have an acknowledgement to the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission who hired you to conduct this study, because it was not part of their original requirement as part of this transition. And they kind of took on the task and said, let's bring on a third party to tell us, as this comes over to the public side, what is best in the public interest and tax dollars to manage this asset. So I just want to acknowledge that they saw this coming and hired your firm to help provide that recommendation and the work that you've done to help inform the public of this is what you're looking at taking on and here are the options. That being said, in that context, down in South Florida, they also have a commuter rail system that was built on CSX tracks. And then in 2003, the Florida legislature combined the versions of links that support those counties along with the commuter rail operation. And I'm wondering, I didn't hear that come up as a baseline of they did this 20 years ago. Here are some of the pitfalls. Here are some of the things they wish they would have done differently. And I didn't know, was that excluded from your scope or was it referenced in the scope? Because I think that would be something the commissioners would like to hear is, they've been doing this for 20 years. What would they say that they would have done differently with 20 years of experience? And I'll just, to Mr. O'Hanlon's point, I don't think it's fair to burden transit riders with, well, it doesn't pay for itself, when none of our discussion about I-4, we said, well, how's it going to pay for itself? And the reason that we have a box fare in transit systems is to create a barrier to entry. Our roadways already have that. You have to buy a car, you have to get insurance, you have to get a license. Those are barriers to entry. Fare box revenue helps create a barrier to entry to keep patrons safe and reduce vagrancy. That's the point of it, not to pay for itself, because we don't ask I-4 to pay for itself. So that's my piece. Thank you.
Yes.
We only, I don't want everybody to leave before we get to our next president. We only have like 7 minutes left. Okay, so if you have a point that's like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I don't think it's that much. No,
So we can keep going.
I'm excited. I was just excited to hear about that you guys are planning on bettering the tap-on system, because when I started using the Sunrail, I was really confused on just how it really worked, and I saw a lot of people. This guy had like a monthly pass, and his ended up getting blocked because he didn't know he had to tap off. So I just think facilitating that user experience on topping off will just make it easier, at least for the ridership aspect for the Sunrail. At least maybe even having one on board, things like that. Because I just was wondering, if I don't tap off, I don't get counted on, even if I tapped on when I got on. So I definitely, with the numbers, that could definitely probably get skewed, just not having that. And similar to what Mr. Pricker was saying, I did talk to one of the employees of the Sunrail. He was telling me about how the freight train goes from 12 to 5. So just seeing how in the plans for the future Sunrail in regards to the freight train, how that would work out in the hopeful future that it will run late night service and working with that training conjunction. And that's it.
Thank you, everyone.
May I respond
sure.
briefly? So, awesome points. You guys have asked a lot of really good questions, and I'm happy to answer them. And, you know, if more need to come back, you know, I can get with Alex and Sarah and get you additional responses. I did want to briefly touch on, so to Judy's point, spot on. Everybody wants it to run all the time. It would be wonderful. With that comes additional operating costs, so then the costs go up higher. So, you know, it's one of those, the cart, you know, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So I think, you know, Sunrail would love to run more, but then, you know, we're gonna have to pay more for it. The hours of operation are a little bit later than 9 to 5 and a little earlier than 9 to 5. So I know that they do start roughly 6-ish, I'm not a morning person, but roughly 6 or so in the morning, and I believe they go, some of the last stations maybe until 10. So there's been some changes, and they've been trying to accommodate exactly what you're saying. Everybody doesn't work between 9 and 5. So those extended hours have been great. Still not perfect, but it's working better and it covers more people. Tri-Rail was definitely looked at, yes. We actually have one of the folks on our staff used to work for Tri-Rail, so is intimately familiar with how it ran and has given us some of those pros and cons. We also did a full peer review of all the commuter rail systems across the country to kind of get best practices. So it's absolutely been looked at.
Okay. Ms. Kendall, thank you. This group has a lot of questions. Okay. But if you had questions that you didn't get to enter, please save them. We will take them and send them forward in one session, okay?
Okay.
Thank you again.
Appreciate it.
Our final presentation is Mr. James Boyle of Links on the latest transit development plan. Mr. Boyle.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I have to say, it's a very great discussion, and I wish we had more time. And I'll just say up front to the Metro Plan, I can come back if need be, and we can do more detail. But I just want to quickly go through our transit development plan update and what we've been doing, where we are, and kind of what the next steps will be. So for those of you who do not know, a transit development plan is basically a 10-year planning document that guides transit agencies on policy decision-making, on service development, and also for future planning efforts. And this is a document that is required by FDOT. So every transit agency in the state of Florida has to have a transit development plan to receive funding. So we do major updates every 5 years, which is what we're doing right now. And then we do annual progress reports on our plan and how we're doing and progressing. So this transit development plan is a little bit interesting in the way it has come together and developed. And we have to go back a couple of years to look at all the work that's been done with the Links team and the community on developing county transit plans. So every county in our service area, Orange County, Osceola County, Seminole County, have their own transit plans that were developed through a major public participation process and also through approval by those respective county commissions. So the Orange County Transit Plan was just updated early this year, so it's freshly updated. And of course, that was in preparation for a ballot measure coming up in November for Orange County, so very exciting times. And so we did not want to ignore what had been done in the past, so we took everything that had been done through the development of these plans, and that is how we built our current proposed transit development plan. So just wanted to make that very clear, that that's how this process has worked for this project. And quickly, I just want to talk about the different types of services. If you read the plans, there's a lot of different services that are highlighted in each one of those plans. And earlier, the gentleman from DOT was talking about a hierarchy or how the arterials work and local roads work. Same thing for transit. You have regional express buses, you have big regional transit like Sunrail, and then you have commuter buses and express buses, and then you go down to like your local bus service, the Links buses you see on your collector streets and arterials every day, right? And then those services that are more for accessibility, those would be community circulators, the NeighborLink service, on-demand type service. Those are at the very local level, which give you more accessibility to transit so you can access the bigger transit system. So in our project, we did a great deal of public outreach, even though a lot has already done previously. This slide just kind of gives you a snapshot of the different things that we did. We had public workshops, we had public meetings, we used our regional working group that we have in Links, and that group is made up of community representatives, governmental representatives from all 3 counties, all municipalities. So it's a very large group. We had a technical advisory committee that we assembled for this project as well. And Links did a lot of internal discussions, but we also met with a lot of our stakeholders, including MetroPlan. We had meetings with MetroPlan staff. And we tried to get as much information out as possible on all of our social media platforms. And we also did a survey. So we had survey available online, and we did surveys face-to-face when we were out at all of our transit stations. This just shows you some of the workshops we had. We had a workshop in each of the 3 counties, and they were in person and also virtual. The most bang you get for your buck is when you go out to where the people are. So we did a lot of outreach at our transit stations, and I heard you talking earlier about the importance of those stations, and sometimes they do become like community focal points. So it is important. So we went to, you can see on the screen here, several of our transit stations, super stops, to talk to people about transit and our transit development plan. Again, social media was a huge help to us in getting information out. So quickly, from our survey efforts and from what we hear from folks, and this should really come as no surprise, the top 3 things you hear the most about transit is we want more frequent service, and we want service more on the weekends and late at night, right? So you always, that is like the top 2 things you always hear. And interesting enough, we got a lot of comments back on our customer service. So not all bad, but positive feedback of customer service experience when calling in, having questions, or actually having a complaint. Quickly, the goals of our TDP are very straightforward, very clearly defined. Obviously, you know, this goes to advancing a reliable, safe, equitable, dynamic transit system for our service area. We want to make sure that we're enhancing the customer experience and getting better at communications. We also want to be sure that we're helping to promote economic competitiveness for communities and local neighborhoods and our community as well. But also, we want to make sure that we're creating a seamless transit system so that people can easily transfer from one mode to the other. Fare types are always an issue. And I'm a Sunrail user, so I know exactly what you guys were talking about earlier with all the Sunrail stuff and fares and passes, so I completely understand. So pulling all this together, the county transit plans are 20-year plans. So what we had to do is we had to go and look at those plans and put this into a 10-year plan. So we looked at the first 10 years of each one of those county plans, and that is how we built our 10-year plan. So I know the map is a little hard to see all the details, and I can do a better job and maybe provide hard copy maps for you as well. But you can see the growth of the system. So you see a lot of new services being added, regional express services, commuter services. And really what's important are some of the higher capacity improvements on some of the major arterials in our community, like Colonial and 92 and 17 and Silver Star. So there's several projects that are outlined in our plan that require a significant amount of capital improvement. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what we are able to show here is that by adding more service, obviously you're going to attract more riders. And so that's not just creating new routes, but it's also adding more frequency and longer spans of service. And so I will say frequency is expensive. So when we talk about building highways and roads, those are expensive things too. But on transit, when you go from, say, a 30-minute frequency, the bus comes every 30 minutes, to a 15-minute, on a typical bus route, you're talking about $1 million a year more in operations just for that one route to go from 30 minutes to 15. So it kind of gives you a general idea. And so that's why when we look at cost, well, how much is all this going to cost? What this bar chart shows really is just the escalation. As we go through the years and we're adding more service, the cost, operating costs increase, right? The red line shows our projected forecast of revenue. And again, what's very important about our plan is depending on how the ballot measure goes in Orange County, that red line obviously would shift. It would go a little further north because you're going to close that gap a little more. On the capital side, it's a very capital intensive project. There's a lot of big capital projects. A new southern operations base for Links, and this would be a state-of-the-art facility that would include electric charging infrastructure for zero-emission buses, low-no buses. I heard some talk about autonomous vehicles. We're looking at kind of a neat demonstration possibly at this new facility of autonomous buses circulating themselves around the facility. But that's to come in the future. And then our plan also requires a lot of vehicle replacements, a lot of new vehicles, so a lot of new buses for all the new transit service, expanded transit centers, and of course, we cannot forget about bus stops. So all of those local bus routes that go into the neighborhoods and communities, bus stops are so important. Sidewalk connections, ADA, crosswalks, those are things that sometimes we overlook. And it's so important because that's how people get access to the bus or to the train. And then lastly, the high capacity corridor infrastructure improvements. These are some of the major corridors I mentioned earlier. And so what we talk about here is high frequency bus service, buses every 10 minutes. You have much larger stops or stations, if you want to call them stations. You have potential for bus only lanes. You have transit priority. So you have all these capital things that would need to take place to make that corridor truly a high capacity transit corridor. So where we are right now, we've done a great deal of work the past few months. We're getting towards the end of our project. We're going to be doing a presentation to our board on Thursday, and then we need to submit our document to DOT on September 1st. And then I just wanted to throw out here some of the other projects and planning things that are upcoming at Links. I remember my first time I came to CAC, I heard someone say they wanted to see more of Links and more presentations. So there's a lot happening, and I'm hoping you'll see more of me. And I'll be happy to come and talk to you more about transit and Links and how all this fits together and what we can do to make our transit system better for our region. So that's all I have for you today.
Mr. Boyle, thank you for taking us through that.
And I hope I didn't speak too fast, but I was trying to get through.
Okay, at this point, if we have a 30-second question for Mr. Boyle, we can take them. Otherwise, we need to collect them. Okay? Going, Mr. Pegram.
Thank you. So your presentation, we always talk about roads with induced demand. You add more frequency, but we don't really talk about it with transit as much.
Sure.
And so I think that's something unrealized, that any investment that we make, I think, is going to have an induced demand associated with it. And I know Mr. O'Hanlon's going to have comments about investment in public versus private sector. So quick example. In Italy, the government improved their high-speed rail corridors so they could run hour-and-a-half frequencies. Well, private companies said, well, we're going to fill that gap, and we're going to have the same exact trains, except it'll be private every hour-and-a-half. And what happened is the Italian government's trains didn't lose ridership. They gained ridership because now people said, I can show up every 45 minutes, and I know there's a train to take me, whether it's private or public. And so just the frequency increase, whether it's public or privately funded, drove induced demand, and they actually put an Italian airline out of business because of it. So that's my two cents on transit.
Well, that's a great point. And if I could say something real quick, I know we're short of time. I got a great example of that. Just recently at Links, we increased the frequency on Route 38 from 60 minutes to 30 minutes. And ridership is it's more than doubled. So there is a lot of truth to that. Like the more frequency you add, you will get more riders, but eventually you get to a point where it just kind of zeroes out. But 30 to 15 is really big. And then 60 that's...
Ms. Pizzo.
Yeah, headway was always an important question that I always heard, is why don't we have more buses instead of sitting on the side of the road waiting for an hour? My statement is more about the bus stops themselves. If you've traveled anywhere, one of my biggest surprises was in the Bahamas. I'm cruising around and I'm looking at these beautiful, colorful bus stops that have a roof over them and benches, and they're inviting. And let's face it, it's hot here, it rains here, and I feel so bad for people standing on the side of the road hanging onto that little pole. We need better looking bus stops, secure bus stops, covered bus stops, and better headway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Council.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I was really happy with everything that you said today, and especially the fact of coming into the community. It's a big thing for me. Ponciana needs to get on the map. The 7,000 people that move down there, and the one bus that goes around, and it's only one bus, and then you have the mini bus, the senior buses, the Lynx senior buses that come out to get them. And I was working at a senior center where I had to wait with a senior for 3.5 hours after their assigned time to pick them up. I waited there because I wasn't gonna leave that senior alone.
Right.
But the bus driver definitely understood that I wasn't happy. Thank you so much.
Ms.
I understand.
Yes, I'll be 30 minutes. I want to say thank
Not
you.
30 minutes.
30 seconds, 30 seconds. Okay, thank you. I want to say thank you to Lynx. The Pine Hills is finally getting, after 10 years in the making,
That's right.
a transit center, a state-of-the-art transit center. So thanks to Lynx and thanks to FDOT for their part in playing in it. It's coming, it's out for bid right now. We're very excited. With 70,000 residents in Pine Hills, way overdue.
I'll relay the message. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm gonna hide.
It's inevitable.
It's not.
I know what he's gonna say, right?
You can let him say what he wants to say.
We have to, we're so far over.
You can always come back.
Okay, moving along, there are several items under General Information, tab 4, your agenda packets.
I think we have a public.
We'll get to that. Our next CAC meeting will be on October 26th. We do not meet in September. We just had summer break now, so this will be our fall break. Please remember to RSVP for the meetings. This is very important to us. The CAC meeting dates for the remainder of the year are in your agendas. Our next Metro Plan Orlando Board meeting will be on September 14th, and I will, of course, take our sentiments forward. At this time, do we have any committee members that really needs to make a final comment? I don't have to look up. Let's see. Mr. O'Hanlon.
If Lynx doesn't decide that they're gonna jump on the bandwagon, private industry is just gonna put them out of business, okay? But we all discussed at length, okay, that we wanted electric buses. So let's hear about our electric buses. How are they working?
Bring that forward next time. Okay. Excellent, okay. Okay, we have now come to the second public comment period. If any members of the public wish to comment and are joining us virtually, please use the raise hand function and you will be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone and we will send a prompt to unmute your microphone. After you are recognized, please state your name and address for the record and hold it to 2 minutes, please. Do we have anyone joining us virtually who'd like to make a comment?
There are no hands raised on the attendee side, Mr. Chair.
Do we have any members of the public attending in person who wish to make public comments?
We do have one speaker, Ms. Joanne Canellis.
Thank you.
Ms. Canellis, you're recognized and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, this is Joanne Canellis, 324 Claremont Avenue, Lake Mary, Florida, 32746. Yes, we do need a better transportation, more frequent, and we need it every 15 minutes everywhere. Please, thank you. And it needs the one that like I mentioned before, over at Estelle Road and Country Club Road, and those also at the Lake Mary Prep School. You know where that is, and don't forget the Big Kahuna swimming pool, better known as aquatic center in Oviedo. Please put the 434 back there, and if you can still keep the, neighbor links right there as well, so that no one would be stranded. And we need 24-hour bus service, including holidays, weekends, and nighttime, so that no one would be stranded and no one didn't have to walk, even on holidays or Sundays or anything like that. Any holidays. And it's, even the 4th of July, especially the 4th of July, because it's very hot there. And don't forget, please put the bus stop right next to the Douglas Avenue. That's where I want my bus stop to be, so we don't have to walk so much like that. Okay? And don't forget, Lake Mary Boulevard Country Club, you need to get the bus closer to Country Club Road so that I don't have to walk all the way down there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Canellis.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Were there any written comments that were submitted before the meeting?
Mr. Chair, we did not receive any written comments in advance of the meeting.
Well, okay. Well, with that, I'd like to say that we are adjourned. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.